So we come to a revision of your play Away, and we start to think about its main method of getting its message across to an audience. The idea of a fractured structure, the idea of intertextuality, of metafiction. Some may refer to it as mise en abîme, of which the image on the page there is reflecting the idea of moving into the abyss, which is the literal sort of French interpretation of it, or close to it as much as you would be, that a character might wake from a dream and still be appearing inside of a dream and then appearing inside of a dream. It's more than just a sensibility of play within a play. Play within a play is a function of such plays like Hamlet and things like that, which enable the character to come to a certain realization in a certain moment, whereas this play runs around the ideas of many Shakespearean texts. In the introduction, you've got Twelfth Night. Now, in Twelfth Night, that opens with a storm and people arriving on a foreign shore. It mentions The Tempest, where a storm brings people to a mysterious and magical island. It opens with A Midsummer Night's Dream, where a magical forest transfers and transforms the characters until they wake up at the end and they come to a sudden realization, as well as the Queen of the Fairies, which is mentioned by Coral. It also mentions King Lear, which also features a storm where characters go into the abyss for a while and then come suddenly to. So it's an interesting sensibility in that way. I want to start with Coral's first long speech, which is really a harbinger of what's to come. She is talking about, of course, Titania from Midsummer Night's Dream. What angel wakes me from my flowery bed? Particular moment there, which is when Titania wakes up and sees Bottom dressed as the donkey, or even made as the donkey, and it's meant to represent a kind of comic device in the original Midsummer Night's Dream, that she wakes up and sees this donkey. But for Coral, it's a reawakening, a re-emerging from herself. When we first met her, she's not speaking. And then when we meet her the second time, she's delivering a soliloquy in very Shakespearean sense. And she's repeating the line, "What angel wakes me from my flowery bed?" She's reminding us herself that she's representative in this play of that character, Titania, the Queen of the Fairies. She has lost a son. Titania has lost her little changeling boy, or she's fighting over the changeling boy. And she is coming to a realization, or to a point in her life at this moment. Interesting. Following that, we get a series of vignettes of the three families preparing to leave and move away onto the holiday, to go to the other, to go to a separate place in different circumstances. Of course, Tom's family going camping here, and we see them debating the quality of going away and the value of leaving the space that they're in, of travelling, of moving to a new space, which is really what most of those other plays sort of represent, the idea of going to discover oneself in the other, in the separate and alien environment. We get the second scene where they're packing to go, and we get all the different debates about Christmas, about meaning, about family throughout this entire sequence. So as you get closer to the end of each scene, they get into a kind of personal struggle about their own identity and story. We get the story of how Meg's mum and dad originally travelled and met. These long stories about leaving the familiar and going into the dangerous other, going into the storm, going into life. And it's like a waking up from a kind of sleeping past, which is really what the play is leading to. And then, of course, the last family we meet are Coral and Roy, and with Coral suffering from the death of their son, and Roy trying to manage a kind of a series of platitudes about what it means to recover from suffering, of which Coral is refusing to do at this point. We are not the only ones, says Roy. History is about picking themselves up and moving on and moving forward. And then he even goes down the line here about fate. We were picked out to pay. I can't help that. We've paid. I can't bring it back. So we have a duty to go on with what we have. Maybe we should have been proud. We're living in a country with one of the highest standards of living on earth, and we have shown ourselves willing to defend that standard. You get the morality of warfare and why a lot of people say it's a necessary tool to defend a way of life, and sometimes families are brought on to sacrifice. Also the idea that there is a higher power determining the fate of the child at this point, very Shakespearean in that sense, that we must sacrifice our firstborn for, or even biblical, for the greater good. As we get to the holiday destination proper, the other universe, the Gold Coast, the surreal place, the place where they've left their lives for a while, the first thing that happens is Coral bumps into a young family who are undergoing a stress themselves, which is interesting because that's where often when people are put into places where they have only the opportunity to reflect on their relationship, they don't have work to divert them, they don't have the home to divert them, their lives become pointed. And Rick here seems to have caused trouble just by mistakenly ordering the wrong thing in a restaurant and everything's blown up. But then he is one of the boys who wasn't called to the war, as opposed to Coral's son. And Coral's able to talk to him about that reality and how that actually deals for Coral in a sense of what it means for her. And it's kind of a reawakening for her, bumping into Rick. It gives her an opportunity for perspective. It gives her an opportunity to come out of the reverie that she's in. And so she's able to move into a new sensibility for herself. And this is, of course, when she escapes down to the magical shore, and we meet her almost as the character of the Queen of the Fairies, almost in that Titania moment, because they refer to her as Kim Novak, which is a sex symbol from the era, or even from the 40s, and she is representative of that absolute Hollywood dream, the place of dreams, which is Hollywood. Then we get a very sort of middle class breakdown, which is interesting because when you're in the middle class, you always have the memory of being from the working classes because that's where you've come from. So Gwen has done something deliberate here. She's hidden all the presents that she would feel would spoil her daughter, and you get this casual family argument. But it's interesting. There's a few moments here that are reflective of that, reminding themselves that this lives inside a Shakespearean reality. We have a line here, for instance, "What's done is done," which comes straight from Macbeth. And that line is when Macbeth refers to what he does to King Duncan, which is murder him. He does something deliberate for the betterment of himself, apparently at that point in the betterment of Scotland. And Meg and Gwen have a set to, and it comes out in Meg here. You're developing a nasty streak, a very nasty, cruel streak. You know what you're becoming, snide. And she's talking about sacrifice, as she does here. Sacrifice. I've gone without heart, through hardship. So what happened to us will never happen to you. So you'll never know what we saw. Never, ever, never ever see people losing their jobs, finding another one, never be without a home. This is a parents who went through the Great Depression. So it's this first generation of people dealing with the Great Depression parents in many ways. And Jim then reminds us that their lives have been informed by the Hollywood dream again. We get the great Hollywood dream of Gone with the Wind. Here, they were living in a house in Surrey Hills, which is classic Depression era suburb. It was a slum in its day. Even though it's worth millions nowadays. Talking about the end of Act 1 of Gone with the Wind, where before the intermission, Scarlett O'Hara claims that she'll never be poor or hungry again, standing up in the field and making this affirmation, which for Depression people, they stood up and cheered, and it gave them a new sense of vigour. And that, again, is the dream factory, Hollywood, giving people new ideas, new hope, new discoveries. It's reminding us of this value of story. Then, in a very Shakespearean turn, we meet some fools. Literally, Shakespeare's fools here with Jim, the campers, talking to Jim about the campsite itself and trying to actually transform it away from the magical into the reality, trying to take away the mystical. So this is almost a metaphorical sense of fantasy versus reality. Excuse me. The fools are very, very set in their ways about they want the campsite to have a series of rules. And Jim is in the middle of this, and Jim's in the campsite because this is a place where there are no rules. There is merely a place to lose the self in the wild. And if he doesn't have that, he can't maintain that need. And so these campers, and they're not named, but much like Shakespeare will put some fools on stage with silly names like Sir Toby in Twelfth Night, and he's got some drunks in The Tempest, and they kind of bring the audience out of that immersion, out of that moment. And they're ridiculous in their sense, but they're also harbingers, because very soon the storm will come and blow all of this organisation away and force the families into a retreat. And then we get Coral and Rick again on the rooftop hotel, and it's almost Titania and Bottom. She's almost in this moment where she is pulling him into a dream, pulling him into a fantasy away from the ordinary. Rick says here, I'm going round the twist. I think I do things I don't understand. I have a job I didn't want. I get married and I can't remember why. And she just says, come into the dark. Come over here and give me your hand. I feel like I'm asleep all the time. Come into the shadows, a boy like you, and they disappear in a dream, here in the corner. So she wakes him up. Essentially, she attempts to wake him up. And then Roy, of course, comes out and breaks the moment, pacing around. We don't know exactly what they do, and it's not necessarily anything untoward, but it's a moment of pulling him out of the dream, of letting him come to a new reality that perhaps what he is doing in his actual life is of no value. And then we get the storm here, and this is interesting. We get the fairies from Midsummer Night's Dream return, and we get Mendelssohn. So now we're getting actually a lot of intertextuality, and we're getting a Brechtian sense of epic play. Now, the epic play was a play that's allegorical and understood that it was theatre, that theatre was the work of a dreamer, of fantasy. And we're putting fantasy in front of people, not reality. The idea of realism in theatre is that people would say you need to suspend your disbelief. Well, Brecht and many others said you don't need to suspend your disbelief. You need to understand that you are watching a fantasy that's teaching us something about yourself. You are watching a dream. And so here we have the dream sequence, the storm forcing the people into the strange shore. And we'll see that later with that play, The Stranger on the Shore. When they arrive at the beach, they find it to be quite beautiful and somewhere they haven't been before. It's interesting. And they mention that there has these ancient imagery, the 5,000-year-old rock platform and what it looks like, and it is a magical and mystical place. And we get this lovely sort of speech from Jim of what we can salvage from the storm. We can start again. And so their discovery becomes very positive because of the forced nature of tearing away all that they have brought with them, all that baggage they brought with them to this holiday. Then, of course, the wonderful reaction from Gwen to Jim, finding Coral to be an interesting person, and she's a mad person. She's sick and tired of seeing people trapped and not moving forward, not breaking out into a new idealism and a new reality. It's an interesting thing. And then we get Harry later talking about coming to a strange place, coming to Australia, and how things are different, and how things seem to be, in a dream in that sense. Then we get Tom and Meg's scene, and the storm has actually made Tom a bit animalistic at this point, driven him away from himself and his intellectual self, where he's now driven by that desire and that physical desire, begging Meg to give him this opportunity. He knows